Whenever you read a work of literature that seems deliberately broken, confusing, fragmented, refusing to make coherent sense or give a clear moral answer, that's not a flaw. It's a deliberate technique. And it's the legacy of a group of writers who saw their reality fall apart in World War I and asked, if reality is broken, if reality doesn't make coherent sense, maybe literature should be broken too. This is how modernism rewrote the rules, and how those new rules of modernism still govern how we read and write today. Yes! If we're going to understand modernism, we first have to recall realism, the movement that modernism reacted against. I covered realism in video 4 of this series on American literary history, so if you haven't watched that yet, go check it out. Modernism asked, what if there is no unified truth? What if reality itself is fragmented? How can we write in this shattered world? Modernism arose from unprecedented changes in society around the turn of the 20th century. The world was struggling with groundbreaking ideas and events that shook the foundation of how people understood themselves in reality. Here are a few of them. Sigmund Freud's notion of the unconscious mind, the idea that we don't even understand our own motivations, that hidden drives we can never fully understand shape our behavior. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. This theory challenged religious certainty about human origins and purpose. Meanwhile, rapid industrialization and urbanization transformed daily life. Skyscrapers, assembly lines, electricity, movies. In 1900, Kodak introduced the simple, affordable Brownie camera. And suddenly, representative visual art no longer required years of training. Anyone could capture reality from their own subjective angle. These destabilizing forces shook confidence in objectivity. Traditional art forms seemed incapable of representing the mystery, complexity, and uncertainty of modern life. But it was World War I that sealed this transformation. The war lasted from 1914 to 1918, 16 million dead. They called it the war to end all wars. Politicians promised the sacrifice would bring permanent peace and that all this death would mean something. That's what they told everyone. But it didn't. Within just years, the world would be at war again. But within decades, an even worse war would come. The promise, people felt, was just a lie. The war shattered faith in progress, in region, in traditional values, and in the promises leaders made. How could you trust grand narratives about meaning when they led to trenches full of corpses? As a result, writers and artists rejected traditional values. As part of this rejection of traditional values, they rejected traditional forms. American writers fled to Paris. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound. These people are called the lost generation, lost because they felt alienated from American ideas, because the war had destroyed their faith that life made sense, because all the promises had proven empty for them. Realist techniques, careful documentation, objective observation, couldn't capture this fragmented reality. So modernism tried to represent the subjective experience of modern life rather than the reality of it. Literature had to shatter along with the world. As I told you, modernist writers rejected traditional values and traditional forms. But even when they used traditional forms, they did so to undermine traditional values. To understand how this worked, let's start with poetry, where modernism's core principles were most clearly articulated. Poetry provided the most fertile ground for experimentation and became the place where modernism's revolutionary principles were first codified. Around 1912, Ezra Pound formulated the concept of Imagism. This is poetry that presents concise images that readers interpret for themselves. His motto? Make it new. Pound started with a 30-line poem about seeing faces in a Paris subway station. Then he distilled it, and he distilled it again, until it just read, "The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough." 2 lines. That's it. 3, actually, with the title, "In a station of the metro." The image is the meaning. It's not the poet's job to explain it. It's the reader's job to interpret it. In fact, only the reader can interpret it. The poet cannot interpret it for the reader. In 1913, Pound published his manifesto, A Few Do's and Don'ts by an Imagist, where he articulated rules for the new poetry. These principles would become foundational, not just for poetry, but for all modernist literature. Let me give you the 4 key principles. First, direct treatment of the thing. Not, I felt sad in the subway. Just the image. The image creates the feeling without stating it. Hemingway's motto, show, don't tell, but taken to its radical extreme. Second, use no superfluous word. Every word must do work. Use absolutely no word that does not contribute to the presentation. Economy equals power. Compression, not expansion. Third, the natural object is always the adequate symbol. Don't write pieces like a dove. Instead, show the dove. Let the concrete image carry the abstract meaning. Go in fear of abstractions. This became a war cry against realist sentimentality and explanation. Fourth, compose in sequence of the musical phrase, not in the sequence of a metronome. This is not the tick-tock of traditional meter. Create rhythm that follows speech, breath, emotion. Write free verse that feels natural. Form should emerge from the content, not be imposed from the outside through traditional forms. These 4 principles, direct treatment, compression, concrete imagery, organic form, would revolutionize not just poetry, but all of American literature. Now, let me show you how different poets used and adapted these modernist techniques, some following Imagist principles closely, others using traditional forms in new ways, all experimenting to claim authority and challenge assumptions. Langston Hughes used Imagist compression and concrete images in The Negro Speaks of Rivers, but he applies these techniques to claim something realism never gave him: racial heritage that's ancient and foundational. He's not documenting oppression. He's asserting Black consciousness as a deep, authoritative, eternal thing, something universal. Imagist technique for a purpose Pound never imagined. Edna St. Vincent Millay became the literary celebrity of the 1920s, a poet who embodied the new woman. She used traditional forms like a sonnet, but filled them with distinctly modernist sensibilities. Take, for example, her famous Sonnet 30. It opens, "Love is not all. It is not meat nor drink, nor slumber, nor a roof against the rain." Millay takes the sonnet, traditionally used since the days of Shakespeare to express romantic love, and questions it. In Millay's sonnet, love is not transcendent or all-consuming. It's something to be examined skeptically and rationally. By using the traditional form of the sonnet, she begs us to question the entire tradition of the love sonnet. Marianne Moore took modernist experimentation even further. Her poem, Poetry, is literally about poetry itself, meta-poetry that questions the same art form that she's practicing. She starts her poem with the words, "I too dislike it." That's pretty radical skepticism. Moore refuses to romanticize art. She demands the poetry prove its worth, that it deal with everything, ranging from what she calls real toads in magical imaginary gardens, concrete imagery, compressed language, challenging ideas. E. Cummings breaks every typographical rule in poems like In Just. Recognizing that poetry had evolved since its first creation when it was primarily an oral art form, he experimented with the way it was received in his own time, read on the page with our eyes. His presentation is visual, weird spacing, no capitalization, invented words like mud luscious, puddle wonderful. Why? Because traditional forms cannot capture, for him, consciousness. The way the poem looks on the page matters. Form becomes part of the meaning. And there are many others. William Carlos Williams with his precise urban images, Wallace Stevens using his multiple perspectives, T.S. Eliot with his fragmented post-war despair. County Cullen questioning divine justice, Claude McKay using traditional sonnets to fight the prejudices embedded in traditional American values. Even though we typically divide poets into separate movements with women over here, black writers over here, white male experimentalists in one corner, that they were not. All of these poets were working together in modernism, all socializing with each other, reading with each other, theorizing with each other, all using its techniques, all pushing literature in new directions. Modernism gave them tools: compression, fragmentation, experimental forms, skepticism. And they used these tools for different purposes: asserting racial identity, questioning gender roles, capturing post-war disillusionment, and experimenting with consciousness itself. But all of them said, the old forms, the old values, the old certainties, they don't work anymore. We need something new. Now, Those Imagist principles that I just outlined, compression, concrete imagery, showing rather than telling, organic form, they didn't stay confined to poetry. Modernist novelists adapted them to create entirely new forms of fiction. Realist novels documented external social conditions. Modernist novels moved inside, into consciousness itself, building on the innovations of psychological realism. But whereas realist novels expanded on the same narrative forms writers had been using for over a century, modernist novelists developed new forms that corresponded to their new view of the world. The key technique here was stream of consciousness, writing that captures the unfiltered flow of thought. No narrator organizing or explaining, just consciousness spilling onto the page. Direct treatment of the thing, but now the thing is human consciousness itself. Look at this passage from William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. Through the fence, between the curling flower spaces, I could see them hitting. They were coming toward where the flag was, and I went along the fence. This is the first line of his novel. It moves from observation to observation with no explanation, no clear subject, no transition. The narrator can't organize what he's seeing into coherent meaning. That's how this particular consciousness works. Fragmented, immediate, without context. Notice how Faulkner follows Pound's principle. No superfluous words, direct treatment, showing, not telling. But applied to the flow of consciousness rather than the physical image. Time stopped being linear. Past and present blur together. Events don't unfold chronologically. They unfold the way memory works. Flashbacks, broken narratives, multiple viewpoints, multiple narrators. Modernist writers experimented with all of these. Organic form following the rhythms of consciousness, just as Imagist poetry followed the musical phrase. Here's another crucial break from traditional form. There's no objective narrator. Instead, you get perspectives that can't be trusted. Narrators who are implicated, confused, biased. The reader has to piece together meaning, if meaning exists at all. Just as Imagist poetry forces readers to interpret the image themselves. Take F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Nick Carraway doesn't fully understand what he's witnessing. He's unreliable, not because he lies, but because he's trying to make sense of chaos. In The Great Gatsby, the American dream does not fail because of documented poverty or because of undocumented poverty. That was realism. Instead, it fails because of psychological emptiness despite wealth. Wealth is not enough in a broken world. That's modernism. Fitzgerald shows us the green light, the ash heaps, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Ecclesburg, concrete images that carry enormous symbolic weight, just like Pound's petals on a wet black bough. When realism asked, what are the conditions? Modernism asks, what does consciousness feel like in a fragmented world? So what did modernism do? Let's recap. Imagism. This was compression in concrete imagery. Experimental form. Breaking traditional structures. Stream of consciousness. Direct treatment of thought. Fragmented chronology. Organic, not mechanical time. Unreliable narrators. There is no objective truth. And a personal voice. Subjectivity is acknowledged. Across poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, modernism said, reality is not unified. Consciousness is not coherent. Truth is not objective. The world had shattered, and literature shattered with it. Now, if modernism said reality is fragmented, what's going to come next? Postmodernism will say, maybe reality was always a fiction. Maybe truth never existed. Maybe meaning itself is just a game we play. Even more experimental, even more playful, even more skeptical. But that's our next video. For now, remember, when you read a poem with concrete images and compressed languages, a novel with an unreliable narrator, a personal essay that breaks the rules, you're reading modernism's legacy. These experiments from the early 20th century still define how we write today. That's all for modernism today. Come back for postmodernism. Thanks for watching Zoopify. Come back for more Zoopify.